The world watched in awe as the Queen stepped onto the grand balcony of Buckingham Palace, waving to the roaring crowd below. But what no one knew, what no history book recorded, was that the Queen was alive that day because of a man who was never mentioned, a man who vanished from the royal guard as if he had never existed. And the twist? He didn't just save the Queen's life, he paid a price that changed his own forever. Edward Whitmore had dedicated his life to the Royal Guard. He was more than just a soldier standing still in the crimson uniform. He was a man of discipline, loyalty, and silent sacrifice. But behind that stoic face, Edward was struggling. His wife had passed away years ago, leaving him alone with their young daughter, Lily. Every day, after finishing his long shift guarding the Queen, he rushed home to read bedtime stories to his little girl, promising her a future where he would always be there to protect her. But fate had other plans. One cold evening, as the palace buzzed with preparation for an elite royal event, Edward overheard something chilling. A whisper in the shadows, a conversation between two unknown figures near the rear gates. "They'll never see it coming," one murmured. "Tonight, it ends." Edward's pulse pounded. He was trained to be silent, to be unseen. But his instinct screamed louder than duty. He had to act. That night, as the Queen arrived at the Grand Hall, Edward wasn't at his usual post. Instead, he was tracing shadows, following the faint glint of a hidden blade. Then he saw him, a man dressed as palace staff, moving closer to the Queen's path, a dagger concealed beneath his sleeve. Without a second thought, Edward lunged. His body crashed into the assassin, forcing the blade downward into his own shoulder. Pain ripped through him, but he didn't let go. Guards swarmed, tackling the intruder, and the Queen was rushed away to safety. The palace never released what happened that night. The media never reported it. The security logs were wiped clean. To the world, there was no assassination attempt, no heroic sacrifice. And Edward Whitmore? The next morning, he was discharged from service. Stripped of his title, Edward returned home to Lily with nothing but the weight of his silence. His shoulder ached, but the pain of losing his purpose was far worse. Months passed. He struggled to find work. Without a royal service record to vouch for him, he was just another forgotten soldier. Bills piled up. He pawned medals, sold belongings, skipping meals so Lily could eat. But no matter how much the world tried to break him, he never let Lily see his despair. One evening, as he walked Lily home from school, they passed a newsstand. The headlines flashed. Her Majesty honors lifelong Royal Guard for 30 years of service. The face in the photograph wasn't his. Edward clenched his fists. He had saved the Queen's life, and yet, in the grand scheme of things, he was nothing but a shadow erased from history. But then Lily looked up at him with bright, unshaken eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "you always say real heroes don't need medals." And at that moment, Edward realized his greatest honor wasn't standing beside the Queen. It was standing beside his daughter, still alive, still fighting. Edward took every odd job he could, from security guard to night janitor, working tirelessly to build a future for Lily. Years later, she graduated with honors, becoming a journalist dedicated to uncovering forgotten heroes. Then, one fateful day, her investigation led her back to an old palace record, one that detailed an unknown guard's silent sacrifice. A week later, a front-page article shook the nation. The man who saved the Queen and was erased from history. The palace had no choice but to respond. The Queen herself invited Edward to a private meeting, and as he stood before her, she held out her hand, her voice filled with emotion. "I never forgot you," she whispered. "I was just waiting for the world to remember." And for the first time in years, Edward Whitmore stood tall, not as a forgotten guard, but as the hero he had always been. Some heroes wear medals, others wear scars. But the greatest ones? They carry the weight of their sacrifice in silence, knowing that real honor doesn't come from recognition. It comes from doing what's right, even when no one is watching. And Edward? He never needed history to remember him, because in the heart of the Queen and in the eyes of his daughter, he had always been unforgettable.